Welcome back, everyone, to the Morning Buzz here on WMSC 90.3 Upper Montclair. And we have a very special guest here. We got Nagla Bedir representing Teaching While Muslim, and I'm very excited to have her on the show. Thank you for coming on.
Having me. Thank you so much for having me.
Just jumping right into things, you are the founder and executive director of Teaching While Muslim. And I was wondering if you could explain to me what exactly your company's about or organization's about.
Absolutely. So it is a company / organization. So Teaching While Muslim serves three purposes. So the first is really to create a space for Muslim parents, students, and teachers in public schools to kind of express and talk about their experiences in public schools, because there is not really a curated space for that, or at least there wasn't, especially when I first started this in 2018. So it's really a space for us, by us kind of thing, which is the first purpose. The second purpose of Teaching While Muslim is also to help rid schools of their racism, of their Islamophobia, and help center educators, curricula, and schools to be anti-racist, social justice oriented, and anti-Islamophobic. And the way that we do that is through offering a variety of workshops for educators in a variety of spaces, and then also working with teachers online and in person to help them kind of like sift through not only their curricula, but their practices and their policies within their schools to identify how their schools are actually perpetuating Islamophobia, and all the other isms, and then ways to actually combat that. And the last way that Teaching While Muslim exists, and this hasn't jump started yet, but we're working on it, is to create like a network for Muslim educators, a space, for us as educators who are in public schools, who have to deal with the microaggressions or the direct Islamophobia from not only our coworkers, but parents, students, administrators, etc., and kind of ways that we could go about dealing with that.
100%, that's really cool. And I'm interested to know, like, what is the day-to-day, actions that you do being part of that?
So I'm actually like a full-time social studies teacher at a high school in New Jersey. And so my day-to-day with Teaching While Muslim really varies. So right now we are working, like Ramadan is about like less than a week away. And obviously, for those of you who don't know, Ramadan is a pretty big deal for Muslims. And there are plenty of Muslim students and teachers who are going to be in public schools who are going to be fasting or observing, the different aspects of Ramadan. And so right now, the day-to-day consists of us preparing the content that we created, which includes like lesson plans, it includes like resources for not only educators, but also for parents who have to kind of interact, with their schools around how the schools are dealing with their students who are going to be fasting. So we create, the day-to-day right now consists of us like creating those lesson plans, sending them out, creating the social media stuff that we need, and then sending it all up to everybody.
Cool. And I'm interested to know, you started this organization in 2018.
Mm-hmm.
Also, you mentioned you are a full-time teacher as well. So could you say like some of your proudest moments during that time period for you?
Wow, so that's a great question. I've never been asked that before about Teaching While Muslim. I think it would have to just be, so actually, one of the coolest and proudest moments had to be when one of my former students from when I was student teaching 10 years ago, that former student actually went to the Graduate School of Education at Rutgers, New Brunswick, which is the same graduate school that I graduated from. And in her class, her professor pulled up the Teaching While Muslim website as a resource for those students. So it was like a super full circle moment.
Yeah, for sure.
Because she screenshotted that and sent it to me, and it was like really, that was one of the coolest and I think proudest moments of it, that like, my former professors are finding Teaching While Muslim a great resource for their students. And then those students actually also ended up being some of my former students. So it was that was a really proud moment, I would say.
That's an awesome moment. I'm sure you were kind of like tripped out at first. You're like, oh, yeah. I'm on to something here. So you mentioned this earlier, and it's definitely something that needs to be talked about more. So like growing up, I'm still in my 20s, but I've grown up through that time. And I noticed like how media represents Muslim community. It's almost like they've gone out of their way to dehumanize them in a sense. And then it's kind of disgusting to see how that has been represented. So, now that we're in 2022, I think you're starting to like see a shift and people are starting to understand a little bit more that these people aren't bad people at all. In fact, they're just like me and you. They are normal people and they're very proud to be who they are and they're very loving and caring and all that kind of stuff. So I'm wondering, how do you think that narrative has changed at all since like the time you've been alive, or do you think there's still a lot more room for improvement?
Yeah, so I was gonna say, I think that's an interesting like perception, right? The perception that it has shifted, because I would argue that it has not. And really the thing that we could look at in most recent times is just like the narrative around refugees who are Muslim. If we're looking at the Ukraine and Russia war slash conflict and the literal like differences and blatant differences, and not just like in the way that the Ukrainian refugees were reported on, but literally you have journalists on television saying these are not, these Ukrainian refugees are Christian. They are not from the Middle East. They are
Mhm.
blonde hair, blue eyed, right? So it's a narrative that is very much still present, and very much still permeates, I think, all aspects of our media. And yes, there have been like significantly more representations, right, of Muslims in the media in, like a show like Rami, or, even in different like ads and stuff. Like you definitely see like more visibly Muslim women, for example, in these places. And there's like more maybe of a normalized sense of the existence of Muslims. But the deep-rooted Islamophobia and really anti-Muslim racism, and it traces back to like Orientalism, is very much still present in our world, and in the media as well. So I would caution to like say that like we're in this like post Islamophobic era, because I would argue that we're not. I would argue that it's shape-shifting maybe, and that we still haven't, as a society, kind of actually interrogated the presence of anti-Muslim racism and racism in general, right? Like, so this is actually this is not specific to Muslims. This is the othering of people that really all roots back to white supremacy. And as long as white supremacy still exists, so will all of these other, phobia slash racism slash et cetera. And so, you know what I mean? So I wouldn't say like that it's actually gotten that much better.
Yeah, I would say it's like a very early intro, I guess,
Yeah.
into that world.
Mm-hmm.
So going on to my next question here is that you mentioned this earlier as well, that Ramadan is coming up. So could you like tell us what that's about and what you guys do during that time?
And by you guys, I'm sorry to clarify, do you mean like teaching on Muslim, or do you mean Muslim
Yeah,
people?
yeah.
Okay, good job. Okay, so Ramadan is coming, which is very exciting, because Ramadan is a month. It's a very, very holy, special month for Muslims. In general, it is where we fast, which means abstaining from eating or drinking anything, yes, even water, from dawn to dusk every day for 30 days. And there are exceptions to that. There are people who are like ill, for example, or elderly, or breastfeeding, for example, who like have other options in a way to worship God, because that's really the whole point of the month. Is fasting is a form of worship. It is a way for us to kind of put all our worldly desires and needs to the side and just like focus on a relationship with God and really focus on your spirituality. So as Muslims, the Teaching While Muslim team is proudly comprised of all Muslims at this moment. And so all of us will be observing Ramadan in a variety of ways personally. And then in terms of us as an organization, we are hosting a workshop on April 3rd at 2 p.m., a virtual workshop for any parent or educator who would like to like just ask questions, but also like understand more of the resources that we're putting out for them to actually, be able to implement them in their schools or to help their kids navigate them. And then the other thing we're doing as Teaching a Muslim for Ramadan this year is asking any Muslim person from literally any age, like pre-K through, our old age here in our 20s and 30s, to send us like little videos telling us what like Ramadan actually means to them. And then we're gonna, put those videos together to also help people who are not Muslim understand the significance, but also the range of significance, right? Between not only age groups, but there are Muslims who like cannot fast, but they increase their reading of Quran or their prayer, or like there's just so many different experiences for people of all ages. And if we provide those understandings for people, then I think more people would just like to have access, right? Like to that understanding, like what the personal experience actually is, what the human experience actually is for everybody. And then we created lesson plans that are the last thing that we're doing is we created lesson plans for elementary school, for middle school, and for high school teachers that have, all the things that teachers need to carry out a lesson that we just posted on our website and we sent out as well. So those are all ways that we're trying to help prep everybody for Ramadan.
So growing up as well, holidays were obviously celebrated throughout the years. And then they say, at least when I started school and throughout school, probably middle school is always, you celebrate Christmas, you celebrate all these other ones, but they never really focused on like Muslim holidays. And then now it's just, everything's just holidays and there's no specific ones. Do you think schools are doing like a good enough job of equally representing all cultures' holidays?
So absolutely not. Like our school calendar is still centered around Christian holidays, right? Like we have quote unquote winter break, but it's actually Christian break. We have quote unquote spring break, but it's actually Easter break, right? And while obviously as any educator is going to be extremely grateful for any break that we get from the madness that is the school year at the moment, it is still very much centered, right, around Christian holidays. And there are some districts, right, like that take off for Jewish holidays. New York City, for example, actually also takes off like for Eid. So Ramadan itself, like the month of Ramadan is not, we don't consider it a holiday. The holiday is actually at the very end of Ramadan, which is called Eid al-Fitr. And it is actually a 3-day holiday, but, obviously because of the nature of the country that we live in, then most people just celebrate it in one day. And so New York City, for example, actually does have Eid off for everyone, and there are very few, but there are districts in New Jersey who also have Eid off. So in that way, like there are some districts that are doing a good job, kind of like of even acknowledging the existence of the holidays for Muslims. But even in terms of celebrations, like what that actually looks like in individual classroom extremely varies and is almost always not very present. So like in my experience growing up, there was never, ever a teacher that like celebrated it or like made a big deal about it in any of my classes, even though obviously like me as a Muslim student in their classes existed. But I also was not a visibly Muslim girl like when I was growing up. Now I'm visibly Muslim, but I was not always actually. I didn't start wearing hijab until like I almost graduated college. And then even now as a teacher, I teach in a high school. And there are like there are teachers who will do something special for like different holidays. And like, well, we had like a whole month, a spirit month, we called it, in December. And it was really almost all Christmas themed. And while like, that is to be understood in a district that is predominantly Christian, there is probably like, there are schools that maybe have administrators and teachers who acknowledge it for their students or create spaces, for example, during lunch when students are fasting, that give, students spaces to leave the cafeteria and not have to sit there with their peers who are eating or drinking those days. So there are schools that do those kinds of things, but there's definitely like not a widespread culture of celebrating or observing or like understanding Ramadan or celebrating Eid. But hopefully, like, we're trying to shift that, right? Like that's the whole point of teaching Muslims, to shift that and providing the resources for people to be able to do that.
100%. And I'm interested to know. So obviously, as media continues to evolve, you're starting to hear voices and movies and all these other things from different perspectives. And I'm curious to know, are there any Muslim artists or actors or singers that we should look out for?
So actors, singers, or what was the third category? I'm sorry.
Anything, just like
Anything. So yeah,
authors.
absolutely. There are many, like, the show Rami is an interesting, I think, take on a very real, like, first person experience of what it's like to be like a Muslim in New Jersey. But there are many famous actors that I'm blanking on right now, and I'm gonna see if I can think of some of their names, who are Muslim and who are very open about their Islam. And there are artists like Lupe Fiasco who are Muslim, who have always existed and um, who represent their religion out there, but also people like Bella Hadid, and even like DJ Khaled, right? Like, these people are Muslim and might not necessarily center their Islam and their work, but another person that like has made a lot of waves, I would say, in the media world is Hassan Minhaj. He's done a really awesome job of also, like, he's a comedian, but he's done a really awesome job of like censoring the Muslim experience in his comedy. Then people like Riz Ahmed or Ahmad. I don't know how people in English pronounce some of the names. I always say it like in the Arabic pronunciation, which would be Ahmed. So yeah, there's a ton. There are so many. There are also like really up and coming, I would say, like singers. There's this one, oh my God, I'm blanking on her name, but she has such a beautiful voice. And of course I'm blanking on her name. She's a Moroccan, like, young girl. She actually has a song with John Legend.
Wow.
Yeah, called Minefields. I'm blanking on her name, but that is the name of the song. And she sings it with John Legend. So I would check her out too.
Okay. Lastly, before we let you go, is where do you see Teaching While Muslim 10 years from now?
Oh, so like, I have so many dreams and like so many ways that I want to grow Teaching While Muslim. So in 10 years, I see Teaching While Muslim as being like a fundamental, like, part of the pre-teaching experiences for future educators, right? So like, literally in universities, like collaborating with universities across the country to help them fix and shape their like pre-service programs for educators to include ways that schools and curricula perpetuate Islamophobia and ways to combat that. So I see, Teaching While Muslim as like consulting with a variety of universities, but I also see like Teaching While Muslim chapters existing in all 50 states in 10 years, in which like educators who are Muslim in those states get to have that kind of space for like themselves, to decompress, but also figure out how to maneuver their identities in their jobs. And in 10 years, I also see us having like an office and a full staff and like, some basic things that like would make Teaching While Muslim grow so much more. That right now, like, I have a really solid but really small team right now, but we, hopefully in 10 years will be like a whole staff, right? That's the dream.
Well, I hope the dream comes true, because I think it's a very special thing that everyone should know about. And we
Thank
cannot
you.
thank you enough for coming on the show. And to you guys in the studio, take it away.